Good evening, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Now, lots of news coming out from side meetings at the UN General Assembly. So the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, disclosed today that Malaysia, Turkey and Pakistan are going to be working together on an English language television channel, this to address the quote-unquote set the record straight and on Islam and to campaign against Islamophobia. Sharaad, what do you think about this move?
Well, I don't know about you, Melissa, but I'm always concerned when politicians want to get into the business of journalism. But let me set the record straight here. Happy if there are more jobs for journalists. I think that's a great win. The question is whether this channel, however it's set up, will have a charter that protects the journalistic integrity of the work that's done. Otherwise, it will fall victim to all those other attempts by the state to produce representations of the world, often we call propaganda. And that will be a waste of resources if that's what happens.
Yeah, exactly. You know, what comes to mind, I'm thinking of things like Russia Today, or now known as RT. I'm thinking about China Global Television Network, which China set up essentially to tell China's stories well. And, you know, China has long talked about the Western news media's hold on international discourse. So setting up this channel was a way to influence the global opinion. Now, they spent billions on it. The question is, has it been worth it? And is this the same route that we should be going down as well?
Okay, so the question is, who's we in the story, right? We have Turkey, Pakistan and Malaysia all coming together to tackle the very difficult question of Islamophobia that has all kinds of forms and expressions around the world. It's probably most intense from the place in which the debate and maybe the discourse around Islam and Muslims is most intense, and that would be, I think, in Europe and Western Europe and North America, right? So this is actually an issue coming from within those societies, and I'm wondering to what extent Turkey, which is in some ways an outsider to Europe, Malaysia and Pakistan, have the wherewithal or even the locus standi to change the conversation. Can they change the European conversation? Can they change the American conversation on Islam and Muslims?
So the question is, who is the targeted audience and who will the actual audience be? Because, you know, setting up this kind of English language news channel seems like an effort to influence the global opinion about Islam and Islamophobia, but really it feels like a very 20th century solution to in the 21st century. Whether, you know, how much the news media can influence narratives, global conversations, I think has been reduced in the past years.
Yeah, and, you know, let's look at some real wins that, say, the Muslim community in Britain has had, and it comes through very interestingly by way of that Egyptian footballer Mo Salah.
Mo Salah, that's
because he's such a big figure within British football, and because young Britons love him, and I think in fact a lot of people just love Mo Salah, that he's shifting on his own, and his success and his demeanor and his outlook is shifting the conversation in Britain around the Muslim person, right? And I think that is, and you can't orchestrate that.
Yeah, it's organic. It's organic. It's not about, you know, having a dedicated media presence. All right, let's move on to a related topic. You know, Dr Mahathir was invited to speak about rule of law and multilateralism at a forum at Columbia University in New York, but his history of defending his anti-Semitic, specifically anti-Jewish remarks stole the limelight. Here's what he said.
Exercising my right to free speech. Why is it that I can't say something against the Jews when a lot of people say nasty things about me, about Malaysia, and I didn't protest, I didn't demonstrate? Well, we have to be willing to listen to views which are not in our favor because of free speech. Free speech is about free speech. When you say, no, you cannot say this, you cannot be anti-Semitic, then there is no more free speech.
That was Dr Mahathir defending his what was deemed anti-Semitic remarks. This was in response to a question that came up at the forum from an audience member asking him to address his past comments about Jews and the Holocaust.
Right, so these are past comments again, Melissa.
Coming back up.
It's really unfortunate. The very important question of the future of the world in terms of, big power, superpower, dynamics, whether we want a unipolar world or a bipolar world or a multipolar world, and multilateralism as being the kind of basis for the rule of law across, in the international system. All that gone because of this past history of remarks. Some of them made and you have to look at the context. It is very specific. But I want to say that clip, Melissa, was very interesting because he likened himself as, well, criticism against me, against Malaysia. That isn't the same as criticism of a community of people.
Right.
And because the Prime Minister cannot be naive about it, because negative remarks about the Jewish community has been used for a really murderous intent historically, no doubt in Europe, that in fact these are not equivalents.
Yeah.
Criticism of Dr Mahathir, criticism of Malaysia is not equivalent to criticism of an entire community of people. And Dr Mahathir, in his defense of the Rohingya people, against prejudice against the Rohingya people, really now starting to contradict himself internationally.
Right. That's right. And the same kind of platform. He's at the UN General Assembly where he talked about discrimination against the Rohingya minority, and now in the next turn making these anti-Jewish comments, effectively undermining his own words. Now, the question is, how will this be seen at home? What would be Malaysians' perspective of this? Will this be seen as, legitimizing racism locally?
Yeah, and that's where it gets also very tricky and complicated. But, Melissa, what the story has made me do is look back in history and look at some of the earlier remarks, some of them emanating from the early noughties, from 2003, when he made a comment at the organization of the Islamic Conference, which then got the late President Jacques Chirac involved, because...
Who passed away today.
He did indeed pass away today. There he, in fact, removed from a statement from the European Union criticizing Dr Mahathir's anti-Semitic remarks. Interestingly, Mahathir then went on to comment on Chirac's. He understood the intention. This is a subject, Melissa, for an entire show, perhaps two.
No, I think it is ironic that, all his comments made at this forum about multilateralism have been completely ignored because of the fixation of media picking up on this story. Of course, surely he knew that this was going to come back and make the headlines and come back and haunt him at all these international forums. So that being the only thing coming out from this now, that everyone's focusing on these remarks.
Could Dr Mahathir have changed the conversation? Could he have changed the script?
Ooh.
Could he have neutered this so that we do not have to keep coming back to the past and replaying this to and fro around the question of whether he's anti-Semitic or not, anti-Jewish or not?
Feels like it keeps coming back, doesn't it? Yeah, it feels like we're, it's this endless cycle that we keep talking about the same kind of comments, and maybe he's even aware of that. All right, well, let's move on to some local news. We have the Education Ministry announcing today that it will be introducing 2 new compulsory courses for students in public universities, and this is for the 2019-2020 academic year. Now, the 2 subjects are philosophy, current issues, and the second, ethics and civilizations.
Well, Melissa, you must know that my heart is in the question of philosophy.
You must be pleased.
I am pleased because I'd studied philosophy at university, but what's more important is not what I studied, but the fact that it's a training in terms of critical thinking, and also being able to discern when an argument is made on false premise or is logically flawed, and therefore just making everybody much more discerning.
All right.
So you will hear, for instance, of politicians speaking in false equivalences. I mean, the idea of equating yourself to an entire community, that is a false equivalence. It's something that a good course in philosophy will teach you.
Okay. All right. So I think the first thing I thought about was, I was like, why is this being introduced? What is the importance of learning about philosophy? And I think you're absolutely right, Sharaad. It helps young graduates think critically. Now, my worry was, okay, are we focusing on creating future-ready graduates? And the simple answer is yes. You know, by kind of introducing ethics and philosophy, it helps graduates, you know, empower them in terms of thinking, in terms of, I guess, discussing, having those difficult conversations, learning how to have those difficult conversations.
Right, absolutely. It's, you know, a course in philosophy is not just about abstract ideas. It's not about learning about philosophy. It's learning to think in ways that are logical, using reasoning rather than just your passions to drive the conversation.
All right, there you go. We're going to be speaking next to an environmentalist, a Malaysian environmentalist, who recently was honored with a prestigious international award. That's coming up in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to consider this.